Hi, welcome to the Southeastern Utah RAC meeting. We really appreciate you taking the time to watch and be involved in the public process. I'm going to read a quick statement to get us started. Due to the continued presence of COVID-19 in Utah and associated public health and safety risk, large public gatherings are still strongly discouraged by the CDC and many local health departments. Based on these risks and recommendations, the Division of Wildlife Resources and the chair of the public body has determined that Regional Advisory Council and the Wildlife Board meetings will continue in a purely electronic format for the time being. Anyone wishing to comment on the agenda items in the future meetings or to observe this meeting may do so by logging into the division's website at wildlife.utah.gov agenda/materials/minutes, where the instructions and links are provided. So that being said, we're going to go ahead and jump right in. I would like to of the Southeastern region. We have our additional members here. We have Kirk Player, Scoot Flannery, Brad Richmond, Kent Johnson, Eric Luke, Steve Duke, and Kirk, I think that, and Dana Truman just jumped on. Chris, am I missing anybody?
Did you get Commissioner Citrud? You did, I think.
Okay,
right?
Commissioner Citrud, thank you. Is he here? Okay, thank you. And we have Chris Wood, our regional supervisor, and some other additional members of the Division of Wildlife that you will meet later on in the meeting. So at this time, I would take a motion for the approval of agenda and minutes.
So moved.
And I have a motion by Kent Johnson. Do I have a second on that? I have a second by Dana, is that correct? By Dana Truman, thank you. And let's just take a quick roll on that. Kent?
Yes.
Scoot?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Brad?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Kirk?
Yes.
And Commissioner?
Yes.
Thank you. And that passed unanimously. Am I missing anybody, Chris, at this time?
I think you missed Dana.
And my sound's back, so yes.
Sorry. Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, Chris. All right. At this time, so that passed unanimously, the agenda and minutes. We'll move on to the wildlife meeting update. And I just kind of highlighted some things that I think are pertinent to us. So there was a motion to approve a 600 permit decrease on the Manti, and then to keep the San Juan Abajo unit permits the same as 2020, and that did pass unanimously. Let's see. I'm just trying, I kind of highlighted a few things that I think are important to us. As far as bull elk and buck pronghorn permits, there was a move to accept the division's recommendations as presented with an addition of one permit on the Little Creek unit, and that did pass unanimously. Carl Hurst had an interesting there was an interesting discussion within the Wildlife Board, specifically about hunting bison and basically providing hunters with a really clear picture on how to effectively hunt bison. So there was a move that the 2021 bison hunters will receive information on shot placement and anything additional the division would like to include. And in 2022, there would be a quick mandatory orientation course for all bison hunters, and that passed unanimously. And so that was kind of an interesting discussion. And then lastly, I think of interest to you was there was to have an increase in the archery hunters choice permits on the Henrys from 4 to 6, and that passed unanimously. So those were the things I think that we were of interest, what were of interest to us. So is there any questions on that? Okay. All right. So at this time, I'm going to have the regional update by Chris Wood, our regional supervisor.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. It's good to see everybody, and thanks to all those who are watching on YouTube. This is our last meeting of the season. This time of year, we say goodbye to outgoing RAC members. We have new RAC members to choose from in the next few weeks or month or two, and then we'll have a summer off basically, and the new RAC season and the board season starts again at the end of July and August. Our next RAC meeting will be August 4th. We're saying goodbye to Trish. She's served for 8 years, including several years as our chairperson. So thank you, Trish. You've been wonderful and diligent and dependable, and you've led us well. So thank you for your service. You'll be missed. We're also saying goodbye to Jeff Christensen and Helene Taylor, who served as our ag reps. And then Jace Guyman is finishing up his term as well. Usually at this meeting, I have cake and we give out big printed framed prints to everyone who served. Doing this virtually, I can't really provide cake to you all. So maybe next time. I do have framed prints for the 4 of you as a thank you gift. I'll try to get those to you sometime, but thank you for your service. Our next meeting, like I mentioned, is August 4th. At that meeting, we'll elect a new chairperson and also a new co-chairperson. So be thinking about that. And as you've seen in our agenda, we'll get to, as you see that presentation, hopefully online, we're looking at a new format moving forward. I think everyone will like it. I don't know all the details. It's still being developed and it hasn't been finalized yet. But from what I'm hearing, it's a hybrid system. So we'll have both an electronic component and an in-person component. It'll allow for us to meet together, assuming that the COVID situation continues to improve and get better, but allow us to meet together. And then it'll also be broadcasted, I believe, and people will be able to either make comments electronically via our survey, or they can show up to the RAC meetings and give those comments in person. I think it's great if RAC members can come together in person, but in situations where they can't, we're hoping that those people can come in through technology, through this format we have now. So I think it kind of takes the best of both formats and hybridizes them into one format that I think everyone will be happy with. So more on that to come. That's just a little overview of what I've heard. I'm not in charge of that process, but we have some great minds in our agency trying to figure out how that format will look for our August meeting. Let me just give a quick overview of what some of the things our region is doing. Our aquatic section, we did a gillnet survey at Schofield 2 weeks ago, about 10 days ago on a Friday morning. That's where we put out nets the night before, and then the next day we pull those nets. It's a good indicator of what's happening in the reservoir, what kind of fish there are, what's growing, whether our management strategies are working or not. And we were really pleased with what we saw at Schofield. The management strategies that we implemented several years ago continue to work. They found several tiger muskies that were big, up to 35 inches long. So tiger muskies are growing really well in that reservoir. The chub numbers, which we don't want chubs in that reservoir, continue to trend downward. And that's because we have these predator fish that are eating those chubs. The average size of the chub is increasing, which is actually a good thing, which it means that some of these, the smaller age classes are being consumed by predator fish. And so that's a good sign. We're hoping that as these tiger muskies grow even larger, that they'll continue to eat even the bigger chubs. Trout numbers were about average, what we expect. And then we also noticed several wipers that overwintered. And so that was a good sign too. Our aquatic section also is starting their work at Duck Fork Reservoir on the Manti. We cleared the road this week. It looks like the beginning of June, we'll be up there with our traps. We'll catch spawning cutthroat trout and squeeze out their eggs and send them to the hatchery. And so we do that every single year. It looks like we'll be doing that around the 15th and 22nd of June. Our law enforcement is busy this time of year. This next few weeks, actually 2 weeks ago, and then this upcoming weekend, they're doing bear saturation patrols on the LaSalles. So what that means is a bunch of officers get together, and for several days, They're patrolling the LaSalle Mountains, talking to bear hunters and interacting with them and trying to having a presence on the mountain. And it's a good thing. We get good feedback from the hunters, and being up there to enforce the laws and regulations is always a good thing. So we'll be doing that this weekend. You probably saw, if you haven't seen, check out our Facebook post today. Our officer, Justin Brimhall, just graduated with his dog. His name is Cooper, from Canine School. He went back east to Indiana several times, spent several weeks out there training his dog. And so now that dog is graduated, and the both of them will be working in our region. Justin's out of Price, but that dog will be a great resource for the entire state, really. But we're glad to have a canine dog in our agency in our region. Our outreach section is doing some good things. We have a predator clinic coming up at the end of June. You can sign up for that event on Eventbrite. That's a website. We'll be putting out some more notice on that and some media information on that in the future. And then I mentioned last time, we're planning a herp day in July. Herp meaning herpetology. And so we'll be meeting with the public and having a day out in the field looking for snakes and lizards and all kinds of fun things. So more information on that will go through our media outlets as well. Our habitat section and our wildlife section have been joining together the last few weeks. We've been meeting with the BLM and the Forest Service and state lands also, and going out onto the winter ranges and doing winter range assessments. We take measurements on these winter ranges every single year. We measure shrub growth and shrub utilization and deer and elk and cattle use of these areas, and try to get an assessment of how the winter range conditions look. As you can imagine, with these drought years, the winter ranges are looking a little tough this time of year. There's not a lot of green out there, but we'll keep an eye on that, and these conditions help us make recommendations for the future as well. I also mentioned that Scott, our non-game biologist, has been doing bird surveys, pinion jay specifically, and doing bald eagle nest surveys also. So that kind of wraps up what we're doing in the region. Again, thanks Trish and Jeff and Helene and Jace for all your service on the RAC. It's been a great service, and we appreciate the voice that you bring to our RAC. And next meeting in August, we'll have some new members to introduce.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much. Are there any questions for Chris or comments? Okay, all right. So let's move on. So we're on to agenda item number 5. House Bill 295, Waterfowl Rule Amendments with Blair Stringham. And Blair, are you gonna, I guess before we'll quickly just do Chris will give us a quick overview of public comments, and then we'll move on to Blair. Are you good with that, Chris?
Yep, that works. So all of you received the public comments via our survey. So hopefully you've read through that and seen what the percentages are and read all the comments. I'll just kind of paraphrase and give you a reminder of what we kind of heard. So for the waterfowl recommendations, we had 60% strongly disagree with the recommendation, 20% strongly agree, and 20% somewhat agree. Some of the comments we received a comment from the Utah Waterfowl Association. The gist of their comment was that additional regulations are needed due to increased guiding and damaging public hunting opportunities. They recommended that DWR add regulations for guiding that includes no hunting on the WMAs, which are Waterfowl Management Areas, limiting the number of guides that access these areas. And they listed 7 or 8 other regulations they'd like to see implemented. And you have all read that list and seen that list. You also probably received a statement from Sportsmen for Fish and Wildlife. They had 3 basic recommendations. They asked the RACs to table the topic until in-person RAC and board meetings can be held. They suggested a working group that works with all the stakeholders. They all get together and figure out maybe some solutions and some compromises. And then they said they support outfitting and guiding on WMAs on a limited basis. Other public comments we got included restricting guiding opportunities. There was comments that say that they severely hurt. this comment suggested that we don't restrict guiding opportunities, and by doing so, we would severely hurt Utah business, tourism, and hunting license sales. There was a few comments that made the point that guided hunters are still public hunters. And there was a comment saying that there was the proposal is a reaction to a few isolated incidences in a few specific locations with a few guides. And there was also a comment that said, if this regulation goes into effect, swan guiding in Utah will basically become non-existent because swan guiding almost all happens on WMAs because of the Bear River Refuge doesn't allow guides. So that's just the public feedback that I got, and we all got.
Thank you. So Blair, do you want to jump in at this time?
Yeah, I'd love to, Trish, or
Okay,
Ms.
great.
Chair. I've got a presentation if you'd like me to share that. Give us some background information kind of on the issue and where the survey is coming from.
That'd be great. That'd be great.
Thank you. So I'll share my screen real quick. It should be showing up any second.
Yep, we got it.
Okay, perfect. All right, so like I said, this is going to be just some background information on why we have this recommendation, why we got to this point, and also some other questions that have been coming up, both from people that have contacted me directly through the RACs and things like that. So hopefully, ultimately, this will give you a little more information and help speed up some of the discussion and fill in some of those blanks in all of your minds. So the current situation, HB 295 is essentially what brings us here today. And that was essentially legislation that said that guiding on WMAs can't occur without a permit. And so as soon as this went through, was in effect about a week or two ago, we quickly got into place essentially what we needed to gather to put forth a recommendation so that we could get the ball rolling so that we could have things in place for the waterfowl season, which starts in September. And so it's a pretty short timeline. I know people have felt like we're rushing through this, but really we're just trying to get something in place for the upcoming waterfowl season. And so we tried to gather background information as quickly as we could. One thing that has come up and has been a little bit of a stumbling block for some of the other RACs is the legality of this. And so I wanted to just touch on that real quick. HB 295 doesn't necessarily prohibit or protect guiding in any way. It simply just says that if guiding occurs on WMAs, you have to have a permit for it. And so kind of where we came in is to ask the initial question of, do we want to allow guiding on WMAs or not? That's kind of how we've approached it and formed a recommendation based on that question. We wanted to also say that guiding has occurred on WMAs prior to this point without any restrictions. It wasn't something that we were enforcing in any way, shape, or form. We weren't encouraging it. We weren't trying to stop it. It basically was just occurring, and it has up until this point. So for some background information, I wanted to quickly just touch on the number of waterfowl hunters we have in the state. So we've got about 26,000 waterfowl hunters, and about 3.5% of those are non-residents, and the other percentage, the 96.5%, are resident hunters. And so by and large, most people hunting in the state are resident hunters. And so to answer this guiding question, we put forth a survey last month, and we had about 5,500 people respond to that survey. And we had multiple questions in there, and then some questions that pertain specifically to guiding. And so the people that responded to those were about 4,800. We wanted to see just the validity of the survey. And so we wanted to compare the resident and non-resident, because I know a lot of people have had concerns of this impacting both of those user groups. And so in looking at that, about the percentages were roughly what we see in the overall waterfowl hunter numbers. 97.5% that responded were residents, 2.5% were non-residents. And so based on that, we felt like it was a fairly good representation of the overall waterfowl community as it pertains to resident and non-resident. And so we felt like this was a good survey, and I'll share the results with you in just a minute. There were a lot of concerns that we weren't using all the data, and that was true for the presentations that we put forth for the brown bag. We had about 4 days worth of data at that point that we'd analyzed. And so we went with those recommendations based on that data. We have since pulled the data, and I'll show those numbers to you now. And that was current as of the Central Region RAC meeting. So that was last Tuesday. And so that morning I pulled the data. So anybody participating in the survey prior to that would be included in these results. And so the way they shook out, we essentially asked people they had 5 options to respond to the survey. We started with strongly opposed, slightly opposed, neutral, slightly support, or strongly support. We felt like that would give us pretty good information about the people that were kind of on the polar opposite sides of this question, and then people that were in the middle as well, with the slightly supporting or slightly opposing. And so I want to run through these real quick. Starting on the left, that dark orange color are the people that were strongly opposed to guiding on WMAs, and they were 46.4%. The slightly opposed were 16.1%, and neutral was 23.4%. And then the slightly supportive on the right side, that blue color is 7.4%, and then the gray color is 6.6%, and they were the strongly supportive of guiding. And so the way this broke out in our presentation, we simply combined the strongly and slightly supportive to get to a yes or no question. And that shook out to be 62.5% were opposed to guiding, so no, and the 14% were yes in support of guiding. We also wanted to look at different user groups, and so we know that some waterfowl hunters hunt all over the place, some specifically hunt one property. So we wanted to see that people that primarily hunted on different areas, how they felt about guiding. And so we looked at waterfowl management areas, federal refuges, the Great Salt Lake, private property, and duck clubs. And what we saw with this was very similar results to what we saw with the overall survey when we combined everybody. So starting on that left again, those are the strongly opposed. It's that dark orange color. Those fell between about 40 and 50%. And as you move across there, you can see the slightly opposed, neutral, slightly supportive, and then strongly supportive. And so the slightly supportives were again probably around 7%. Strongly supportive were about 6%. We also looked at non-residents. There's been a lot of concerns that we're overlooking this group and that guiding is really important for them. And so we again asked the same question. We found that about 40% of them were strongly opposed to guiding, but we did see about 25.6% of them were strongly supportive of guiding. And so that's probably because a lot of the non-residents are using guides when they come to Utah to hunt. And so we did see that bump up quite a bit compared to the other survey results. We also looked at user days for waterfowl hunters in the state. We found that our WMAs have about 56.3% of the total user days for waterfowl hunters in the state. And so that's a huge number. You look at some of the other properties, private property was about 15.5%, federal refuges 10.1%, it kind of goes down from there. But I guess it emphasizes just how important our waterfowl properties are to hunters in the state, where over half of the people that hunt waterfowl, half of the days they hunt are on our WMAs. We also looked at people that just hunt at least one day or more on our WMAs, and that was 71% of all waterfowl hunters. So again, most people are seeking these properties out to hunt on at some point for some duration of time. You compare that to some of the other properties we manage, like our wildlife management areas, and we probably see less than 3% of people hunting on those properties. So it just shows that specifically for waterfowl, our properties are really important for those hunters. We also looked at specific WMAs and where most of the use is occurring. And so the top 5 of those were Farmington Bay with 25.7%, Ogden Bay with 19%, the Willard Spur with about 13%, Public Shooting Grounds with 10%, and Harold Crane with about 8.7%. So these are all properties that are along the Great Salt Lake, from about Salt Lake north up to Tree Mountain. It's where the majority of the waterfowl hunters are at, and so it's not surprising that that's where the majority of days take place. Between those 5 properties, we saw about 76.3% of all waterfowl user days occurring on our WMAs. And that also coincides with the majority of properties where we see guiding occurring as well. So it's kind of where some of that overlap comes between guided hunters and non-guided hunters. I want to do a quick comparison and just look at what some of the other states in the West are doing. There's several states that don't allow guiding at all on their properties. That's Washington, Idaho, Montana, and all the federal refuges. They also don't allow guiding. There are states that do allow guiding with some exceptions. That's California. They do allow it, but they require a large portion of the money made through guiding be returned to the state. And it's a high enough percentage that it's not really realistic to guide hunters there. Oregon does allow it, but they don't allow money transactions to occur on their property. And Alaska allows it as well, but you must register with the state before you start guiding. And then there's 2 states in the West that do allow guiding. and that's Nevada and Wyoming. So some other things to consider. We knew from the very beginning this was going to be a polarizing issue. It's something that has been on our radar for quite a while now, but we just hadn't ever addressed it just because we knew there were such strong opinions on it. And with the passing of HB 295, it kind of made us look at it a little closer and come up with a decision. And so before we had even put together a recommendation, we wanted to gather some input from a variety of different user groups just to find out what their opinions were on this. We talked with the majority of the sportsmen in the state, the sportsmen's groups, and most of them felt like there was a need to restrict guiding to some extent. We also talked with the waterfowl managers, our division personnel. Most of them also felt like that there was some need for some regulations on guiding. And so after that, we put together the survey, and you just saw the results and what those were from the overall public. And so based on that, we felt like there probably wasn't a lot of support from most hunters for guiding on waterfowl management areas. And so that's where our recommendation stems from, is basically just the feedback we received and the lack of support we were seeing for guiding from most people that we had polled. We have got questions though, as why didn't we put a committee together prior to this? As I said, there was a short time frame, but we also, I guess our feeling was that if we put a committee together, you're kind of starting the question at how are we going to allow guiding, rather than is this a yes/no question. And so we felt like because of the strong data that we had showing that there wasn't a lot of support for it, we'd initially start at this point and bring that to the RACs. It's important to remember that we're not prohibiting guiding throughout the state. This is specifically just on our waterfowl management areas. And so this doesn't stop people from guiding anywhere else. So private property, state lands, any of those properties are still available for guiding. This is specifically just for our waterfowl management areas. And also something that's come up in just about every RAC meeting, people have asked about our capacity to produce special use permits. Part of our recommendation is to allow guides to cross our properties with a special use permit. And so we were preparing for that prior to bringing this out to the RACs. And so we are capable of doing special use permits in whatever that means after we go through the RACs and board meeting. But we can accommodate that this year and get people permits depending on what I guess the ultimate decision is on guiding or not guiding or crossing the properties or whatever you guys decide. So that's all I have. I'll stop sharing my screen and turn the time back over to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Blair. So at this time, if you have questions for Blair, he's here to answer your questions. So let's do that.
I've got a few questions, Blair. You mentioned that this doesn't restrict guiding from other areas, but if I understood your information correctly, basically 3/4 of the hunter days are in the field or happening on these WMAs. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so it's probably a little over half the actual number of days are happening on our properties, and then 3/4 of them are happening on those 5 properties that I listed along the Wasatch Front.
Okay. So is it fair to say that more than half of the premier waterfowl hunting in the state is the waterfowl or the WMA areas?
Yeah, it's probably a fair question. We spend roughly probably $1 million each year on personnel and other monies to manage those properties. So we manage them to be high quality habitat. In total, though, all of our WMAs are probably only about 120,000 acres. And so I couldn't tell you offhand, but I mean, there's thousands of acres of duck clubs out there. The Bear River Refuge alone is probably around 80,000 acres. So there's still plenty of other places to hunt, but I mean, our properties are very high quality habitat that attract ducks as well as hunters.
Right. But the refuge is that's closed to hunting, correct? All the refuges.
Nope. So it's about 60% of the refuge is closed to hunting and about 40% is open. And so probably about 1/3 of our swan hunters go to the refuge to hunt. And so there's a lot of people that go out there to hunt on those properties as well.
And the guides can still access that and hunt that area? Is that correct?
They can't on Bear River Refuge. So all the federal refuges don't allow guiding.
That was my point. So the public hunters can, but guides are not allowed. So really we're limiting guides to, if we take away the WMAs for the guide, we're really limiting on them on any type of a quality, I guess, so to speak, hunting area.
It depends. And so probably the best goose hunting in the state occurs on private property. I mean, all the ag fields. And so most of those good fields are generally leased up by guides. We still have like some tremendous hunting on the Great Salt Lake itself, which is all sovereign land. And so that as well is allowed for guiding, and they do guide out there a lot, especially later in the season. So,
okay. And then a little different question. Expound or explain a little bit of in your presentation, you talked about, properly licensed and permitted guides. Now, if I understand, I've tried to do a little bit of homework on this, and through DOPL, there is no regulations governing waterfowl guides, correct?
Yep, that's correct. So the DOPL stuff applies specifically to big game, cougar, and bear.
Yeah. So what constitutes a properly licensed or permitted guides? If I understand part of it right, there's permits through different entities, whether it be a BLM or state parks. Can you kind of explain and expound on what that constitutes?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So we actually currently don't have any kind of things that would consider you to be a legal waterfowl guide. We did put forth some stuff. It's in the RAC packet. I was going to try to pull it up real quick, which essentially would be what we would require for the special use permit. And so that would be, let me see if I can find it real quick. Essentially, you would have to apply for that permit. You'd have to require proof of insurance. You would also have, we're asking people to be required to get the registration through DOPL, and also have the proof of passenger hire, which is something that state parks offers for people to transport people in their boat. And so that was what we'd be requiring for our special use permit. It still isn't necessarily licensing you as a guide in the state. So if you weren't on our properties, you wouldn't need any of that stuff. You'd be able to just guide and do it without anything through DOPL. But on our properties, you would have to have those three things.
Okay, and that, I guess that was kind of my point, because it seems to me that, I believe we can accomplish a lot of or address a lot of the current concerns of the unguided hunters or the unlicensed guides, the guys that are just going out without that, through that permitting process. I guess the question that brings up is, what's the enforceability? We got plenty of laws on the books and rules and regulations that are essentially very difficult to enforce. If we do offer the permits, can we enforce the things that they would set forth and separate those who don't necessarily feel like they have to follow the rules and regulations?
Yeah, so in conversations with our law enforcement officers, they feel like it's definitely something that they can enforce. It's similar to all wildlife laws. We issue 70,000 plus deer tags and have 30 or 40 law enforcement officers in the state trying to keep those guys honest. And so there is going to be some background work on trying to prove if someone is a guide or not, if they have the proper documentation, if they're actually taking clients out. But our officers feel like it's definitely something that is enforceable.
So one last question, because it sounds like there's a lot of guides, or so to speak, guides out there taking clients out, but through the contacts that I've made, it sounds like honestly there's only one guide that's actually going through the motions and doing the things that they're supposed to be doing, that has all of the permits, all of the insurances. Is that pretty accurate?
So I guess there's not necessarily anything that would make you a legal guide right now in the state. And so all the stuff that we're proposing in rural would on our WMAs, but currently, I mean, you really don't need anything. And so there definitely is a guide out there who is, preaching that they have gone through the legal steps, which they have definitely covered their bases. They have the insurance and all those other things. So, I mean, they've covered themselves from a liability standpoint, but it doesn't necessarily make them any more of a, credible guide than, some guys advertising on Facebook and taking people out. And that's simply just because there's not a process right now to become a licensed guide.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
Good questions,
Blair,
Eric. Any other questions for Blair?
I have a question too. And it's actually leads off of what Eric was asking. Has there been any discussion within the state, within the DWR or anything about setting up a process where upland game and waterfowl guides would have to go through a process and permitting just like big game or cougar and bear?
We haven't done that. We feel like that's probably outside of our lane a little bit, where we have an actual agency within the state that does that. It's the DOPL, the Occupational Professional Licensing Division or Department. And so we haven't looked at setting that up, and we've just looked at it specifically to our properties and how can we address different uses. And so we have a process in place right now called a special use permit, and we issue quite a few of those every year for people doing specific uses on our properties. And so this would essentially fall into that category where this would be a use that we would have a fee for, a permit for, requirements on what you need to get that permit. And once people met those, we could issue a special use permit for them. So.
Kent, do you have more questions?
No, I think that answers it.
Okay. Do we have any additional questions for Blair before we start taking comments?
I have a couple, if you don't mind.
Great.
So, House Bill 295 prohibits commercial hunting and outfitters from using waterfowl management areas without a permit. So basically what you're telling us is that it was the survey that came out with a 60% plus against guiding that made you decide to take it to where guiding is just prohibited. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep. Yeah.
And so all the different user groups. Oh, go ahead, Blair. Were you going to say something?
Oh yeah, I was going to say. I mean, the survey definitely, I guess, supported some of the concerns we've had. We've had essentially a list of concerns prior to that, and so I guess that was, the justification we need, where the public also felt those concerns were valid. So that's kind of why we did the recommendation.
Okay, thanks. And so you showed us a slide earlier that showed that the user groups that you surveyed were all strongly against guiding. Is there any reason that the prohibition on guiding wasn't expanded to the rest of the state, to the rest of the properties? I mean, if you're looking for just going by basically majority rule, the public says we don't like guides. Is there any reason that it wasn't expanded to mirror that?
Yeah, so part of that is because we only have jurisdiction over our properties. And so I guess we would default to any of the other federal land management agencies or private property holders, anybody like that, that if they wanted to allow guiding on that property, we wouldn't have any issues with it. I guess our concerns really just stem back to our specific properties where we know they're highly used by public hunters, or they're highly used by guided hunters as well, who are also public. And so I guess we were just looking at this as to what do hunters in general want. So that was specifically why we tailored it to, waterfowl hunters in the state, try to get a large sample size just to get the pulse of those hunters so we could move forward with some kind of recommendation.
Awesome. So do you guys feel like you have a pretty good handle on the guides? I mean, the guides that are offering these services up there, do you know who they are?
We know who some of them are. And so there's probably 4 or 5 who are like legitimate businesses. They have a web page, Facebook page, they advertise, you know who they are. There's probably at least a dozen more that we're aware of who are just doing it on the side, advertising on KSL, word of mouth. We know of, like I say, about a dozen of those at least. There's probably more, but the actual number of people currently doing it, we don't have any data on.
Okay. If there was a permit process, do you guys think that would that give you a better idea?
Absolutely. Yep. So that would, yeah. So it would require people to register with us so they could be a legal guide. And so, I mean, that would quickly allow us to tally how many people we have doing it, at least legally, assuming they all went through the proper channels to get that permit.
Okay. Is there a system set up already where people can get those special use permits? Maybe not necessarily for guiding, but for other uses on those management areas?
Yep. Yeah, so we have a lands team within the division that issues those permits. Generally, they go through the region, goes to our Salt Lake office, and they're able to get a permit for this and any other activities that people are interested in.
Okay. So, and how hard would that system be if you were to adapt it to be able to allow for guiding? Would it be difficult to adapt that system, something that could be enacted before the waterfowl season this year?
Yeah, it's definitely something we could do within the waterfowl season, or before the waterfowl season. Like I say, we kind of had conversations along these lines already. They're aware that there's going to be an influx of people applying for permits to use our properties as guides. And so it's definitely something that's doable before the season starts this fall.
Okay, thanks.
Are there any more questions for Blair before we move on to just general comments and or motions?
Just one more clarifying question. We're on the survey, was this specifically, how do you feel about waterfowl guiding in general? Are you opposed to that? Or was it waterfowl guiding on these WMAs?
Yeah, so I don't know if I've got the actual wording of the survey, but it was essentially, do you oppose or support waterfowl guiding on waterfowl management areas? Something to the effect that, we identified oppose, support, and specifically for our properties.
Okay, thanks, Kirk. Any more questions?
I do have one more question.
Okay, great.
I know one of the biggest and the hottest topics basically is with the swan hunting. Most of that happens on the WMAs. Is that an accurate? I believe I saw on one of the other RAC meetings, I tried to watch at least portions of them, and you address that a little bit, but I don't remember the numbers. Do you have those numbers available?
Yeah, so yep, so it's probably about 30% of swan hunters take swans on the Bear River Refuge. And then probably about 50 to 60% are on our properties. And then there's probably roughly 20% or so that take swans on other properties. There's quite a few duck clubs where people will harvest swans. There are some state lands out there where they harvest swans. Some private property that are just ponds. People even occasionally will get them flying over fields, things like that.
Okay, so if I understand your numbers right, roughly 80% of the swans taken typically happen on an area that would, if this recommendation passes, would be off limits to guides and guided hunters.
Yep, so that's correct. And it's partly because those properties are just so easy to access. They're super easy for people to do it. They can go out there. There's a lot of swans. It's not to say, though, that percentage couldn't increase outside of our properties. It's simply that people aren't doing it. But there's definitely a lot of potential to harvest swans outside our properties as well. It's just going to be a little more work than it is on our lands.
Okay, I appreciate that because I'm not a waterfowl hunter. Not familiar with the area, but I do understand the critical nature and the hot topic that this is. So I want to be able to understand that as much as possible.
Just one clarifying question there. So the 80%, I didn't follow that, or it didn't add up to me, because didn't you say 33% on Bear River, and Bear River doesn't matter. We're not talking about Bear River here. So it was only like this, what we're voting on would only affect, you said 50 to 60% of the swans taken, correct? Not 80%.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so if you combine, I guess, the two public properties where guiding wouldn't be allowed, I guess that, Eric, that's probably what you were referring to.
Yeah, so the guides cannot hunt on that on the refuge. So basically 80% of where the area of 80% of the swans are taken would be off limits to guides and guided hunters if this recommendation passes. Does that make sense, Kurt?
I got it. Yep, I got it. Yep.
I have one more question, Blair. With regard to the swan hunting, is it your belief that most of the guides are using the waterfowl management areas because access is maintained by the division and it's easier to get in and out?
Yeah, so it's kind of the low-hanging fruit. We basically manage our properties so they're easy to access, and we have lots of dike lines, we have lots of boat ramps, things like that. And so it's easy for anybody to come to our properties and hunt. If you were to, try to find other places to shoot swans, you certainly could, but you'd have to probably acquire permission from private property owners or do more scouting and things like that. So it's just easier for people to come to our properties and shoot swans because they know they're there and their access is really easy.
Okay, so it's not going to, like, if this proposal passes, do you believe it's going to eliminate the ability of, like, people to guide swan hunters? Is it going to take that out for them, or is it just going to make it to where they have to think a little bit different or move to a different property?
Yeah, it's going to make it tougher just because they're going to have to do more of the legwork to find where swans are, acquire permission, and things like that. It certainly won't, make a grind to a halt and no one will be able to do it. It'll still be available. It just won't be as easy.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions before we move on to comments? Some really good questions. Okay, so at this point, let's just start taking comments.
Okay, I have some comments.
Okay.
I'll start. My first comment is with regard to the surveys, put out that Chris went through, and the ones we all got responses to it. People after they watched the presentation. I don't know if we can put a lot of stock into that survey, because what I seen and what I gathered out of that was we had a few guides that were calling up clients and telling them, you need to respond to this. You need to come to our defense. So I don't know that we got an accurate read on what people actually think about it. I did read some comments, and like Eric said, it's a very polarizing issue. I never heard anything that was kind of middle of the road in the comments about it. As I read through it, it was all very passionate one way or the other. So my concern, I looked at it, people, as they claimed, some of the guides were claiming that you can't hunt waterfowl without all this specialized fancy equipment, and we need guides with their special fancy equipment in order to do it. And I'm not much of a waterfowl hunter. My brother and I did when we were younger, and we didn't use fancy equipment. We found some guy that used to run the river, and we bought a canoe off of him for $35, and we went in the canoe, and we didn't have any decoys, and we sucked at it, and eventually we did get to where we could take some birds. But my point is, we don't have to look at it as people are somehow unable to hunt waterfowl if they don't have a guide. And that was a lot of the comments that were sent to us from guides and people who had been guided, that you can't do it without a guide. And well, you can. And I'm saying this as a guide. I'm a licensed guide for big game. But at the same time, I think that we have, you know, we don't want to completely yank the rug out from under people that are guiding that have been doing it for a long time. So I think I would support a limited permitting process where we, you know, a special use permit for maybe 1 or 2 guides on each of the WMAs to go in. Mike could be able to get behind doing that.
That's a great comment. Do we have other comments?
Yeah, I got a comment. I kind of agree with what Ken said. I mean, I tried to do some research, and I know that there was the survey that the division put out. I also know that the Utah Waterfowl Association put out their own survey with very similar results as far as the percentages that were against opposing the guiding on WMAs. I also reached out to that gentleman, the president of and spoke with him on the phone, the president of the Waterfowl Association. And he's kind of a history buff. He actually kind of filled me in on the background of why the WMAs were created. And that was to protect the public interest and public hunting. So, I mean, having said that, you know, the public has kind of spoken that they don't want the guides. Having said that, I've listened to some of the other, I know some of the public just don't want guides out there because they can't compete against them. They're not as good at finding and killing. I also learned through some of my inquiries, I've spoken with people on both sides of the issue. I know some of the problems or the issue is not as much about the hunting as it is about access, and very limited access, say, to parking areas or things like that would have to be dealt with other agencies to find a solution to those type of things and funding. So, you know, having said what I said, we also can't forget the fact that the smaller percentage that are in support of guides are also public hunters. So I honestly feel like, for lack of a better term, I feel like because of the times given the division because of House Bill 295, I kind of feel like this proposal is kind of like pushing the easy button, so to speak. I respect the work that's gone into it and the time that's gone into it. But I really feel like there's an avenue to find a solution that will work for everybody. I know the issues with all the different guides and going, you know, transferring multiple groups of hunters in and out of an area. They can leave their decoys there as long as they're attended by someone. So some of them may be having guys camp out overnight so that they don't lose their area. That jeopardizes the public hunting, where, you know, a public hunter, he goes, kills his tag, he gathers up his decoy, and he moves on. That spot's open to someone else. But I really feel like a lot of those issues can be addressed through that permitting process. And it sounds like, Blair, you've talked and discussed some of those issues and have addressed in the permitting process. But I really kind of like the idea of SFW's proposal, putting together a working group. And I know that there's some time restraints, and I've listened to some of those comments with the other RAC meetings. And it sounds like there's still the ability to do that, follow the House bill. But I really think that we can come to some sort of agreement that would work for everybody without banning and limiting those opportunities for even that small percentage that are using guides to do the hunting. So that's my comments.
Okay, thank you, Eric. So do we have any other comments?
I guess I'll make a comment saying that, from a land management agency, I do understand special recreation permits. They can be managed and you can stipulate it. But for me, this question comes down to more important, like the opportunities that are out there. I really do think there's opportunity to hunt waterfowl outside of the WMAs. And I greatly respect the habitat work and the management on the WMAs to make it accessible to public hunters. I understand that guided hunters are public, but I think it's a nice opportunity to provide public hunters a space to hunt waterfowl in our state, because we are limited with water. So my comment is I do support the Division of Wildlife's proposal because of the good management that's been done on those WMAs. I thought it was interesting that surrounding states also have kind of banned guiding on WMAs. So I think there's it's not just a quick decision. I think other states have thought this out as well. So I kind of wanted to put that out for people to think about. My last comment is it does, even though I've said that and I support the proposal, it could feel fast if you were someone who guides to have been planning on this fall and to have it then removed. So I don't know if there's a way to, oftentimes we do like a 1-year phase in or a 2-year. But in any case, I think we should consider the division's thoughtful proposal.
And another comment as well with regard to this. Something that's been common in eastern and southern states for decades now and is starting to creep into Utah, Colorado, some of the western states more often, is guides buying up and leasing hunting rights on private property. That hunters used to be able to go and get permission to hunt there. They can't do it anymore. It's happening here in the Green River Valley now, where guides and outfitters are taking over properties, and that's another thing to have to think about is guides and outfitters do have that option, and they are starting to use it more frequently in western states. And that's something to consider as we look at this as well.
Good comment. Any more comments?
I'll have a quick comment. I think that it could be accomplished through the special permit, but kind of like Blair said, that could happen. But the question is, do we even need that to happen? And the results, and I'm a little hesitant to take the majority rule on this. I don't want to go the way of Colorado with ballot box biology and what they've got going on there. I don't like that one bit. But this isn't this is a very targeted demographic, and those are pretty large numbers that they were able to pull on this poll that they did, and the results are pretty solid. I mean, it's not even close as far as like the statistics of it go, and that's kind of what the public is looking for. And to the idea of it being too fast, and I mean, there's nothing to say that if this is under the division's control, that it couldn't be brought up next year, and we decided, you know what, we made a mistake. We want 2 guides in. I think it would be, and we can do that next year. I mean, we can do that. We can go either way just as easy. But it seems like right now the overwhelming majority is saying no go.
Yeah, well, that's why I opposed and lobbied a lot of people and was actually successful with a couple of legislators in getting them to vote against 295, because what it boiled down to is biology by ballot box. And we all see in California how well that works. And, you know, and I have to appreciate the division's position they've been placed in by this. It's a pretty horrible piece of legislation, actually. Not necessarily what it tries to do. I agree with a lot of what they wanted to do with the legislation, but I just don't think that it was something that the legislature should have been trying to do. It should have been left to the Division of Wildlife and let the professionals handle their job. So, you know, the division, that's another thing we have to look at in looking at this too, is the division's been placed between a rock and a hard place with this. And, you know, the legislature spoke and the governor signed it. So now we are left with, we have to have this in place before the waterfowl seasons begin. Period. It's not an option. We got to do something.
Right.
So Kent,
I'd like to make one comment. I'd like to make
Go ahead, Lynn.
one comment addressing what Eric said there. I'm not saying that I agree or disagree with the legislation, but one aspect that we need to look at is, like Eric said, a guide. And these guides, some of them aren't much different than your big game guides that are out here on our mountains right now. If that guide can have some guy camp there and stake out a spot, he'll put 3 guys camping in 3 different places, so that when the grandpa or the dad goes out the next morning with his little girl or his little boy to try go hunting, the guides have got 3 guys already camped there all night, and it's kind of hard to take your kids out and get them involved in hunting.
And then Eric, did you have another comment?
yeah, so more of a question, because what Kent said, I'm not sure is accurate about we have to do something before this season. I've watched some of the other RAC meetings or portions of them, and it's been brought up about tabling this, putting together a working group or a committee to that involves all of the entities, including the guides, including the public. And Blair, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is an avenue. The bill doesn't necessarily state that we have to have something in place this year, does it? There is an avenue to go about that. Is that accurate?
Yep, that's accurate. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to act on it immediately. It does require us to report to a committee, basically, and give them an update on anything we did addressing anything in that bill. And so essentially, the bill asks or requires that you have a permit if you are to guide on our properties. And so if we put forth this effort, it ultimately, failed in the public, or didn't fail, but through the public process, there was no real outcome to put a permit process in place. If that's ultimately what happens, then we could probably report back to that committee and say, we put forth this effort, it wasn't supported by the public, and so we'll readdress it. At the time being, we can't get a permit process in place, and so we'll address that later. So it'd probably be okay. So depending on how you want to vote it, we could be okay to not have a permit process in place, but we could accommodate that as well if the RAC felt like they do want a permit process in place. So I guess it's really however you guys want to move forward.
So I have a couple comments. Were you done, Luke? Sorry, I don't want to cut you off if you weren't.
Go ahead.
I'm sympathetic to the plight of the average hunter. The surveys that came out and said we're against guiding, because that's who I am. I'm the average hunter. At the same time, there's some serious issues that have been brought up and the things that bother them. And then we've also recognized that we don't have a good tab on who all the people are, that are, the guys that are doing some of these things that bother other hunters that get in the way. Like, let's say they are camping people on their decoys. Well, we've also talked about having the possibility of being able to get a special use permit. And I think that you could put conditions on those permits to say, hey, look, you can't camp 3 guys out there on 3 different spots to hold them. You can't, put things out there that say, hey, these are some of the issues that we see. If we notice that you're violating these, then you're going to lose your permit. I just don't like the idea of saying, hey, we've got this problem. We've never regulated it in any way in the past, but as of today, we're going to ban guiding 100%. I think that all-out ban would be a huge, just probably too drastic of a step when we haven't really explored or exhausted any other resources that we have, any other options. So my thought is, I really liked what I saw from the Southern RAC, and I've watched some of the other meetings as well and picked bits and pieces of what I liked. But I think if we were to say, look, for this year, so that the guides and outfitters and everybody that have plans, they've made those investments already, let's provide an avenue to where they can get a special use permit. And in the meantime, we form that committee of the stakeholders and those that come to the table with interest, and allow them to say, okay, and this is how we're going to carry it into next year. We're either going to continue a special use permit, maybe on a limited basis, or we're going to say, you know what, actually, yeah, we need to just straight up ban guides because this is not working.
Okay, Scoot, I'd like to start moving forward. So that being said, and it seems like you had two separate things there. Would you like to make a motion?
Yeah, I can do that. And am I off mute? Yeah, I am. Okay. One more thing. This is probably conjecture. This is conjecture, but if we were to put the same survey out to hunters on any level, big game, bear, well, maybe not bear and lion, but big game hunters, and said, how do you feel about guides? They're going to say, well, I don't want guides. Nobody wants to see guides out there in your spot. I don't. But at the same time, I don't feel like I can say, I don't like you, so therefore stay out of here. But anyway, my motion would be, let's create a permit process for this year, moving into the 2021 waterfowl season, and recommend that the division form a committee to create regulations moving forward past 2020.
2021. Okay, so let me kind of try to restate this and let me know if you're okay with it. So I have a motion on the table by Scoot Flannery to create a special permitting process for waterfowl guides for the 2021-22, I don't know if I'm saying that right, season. And in, I don't know how I'd say, paralleling that, have a working group. Oh, I don't know if I'm saying this right. I don't know, maybe Scoot, let's try again. I don't know if I'm stating this correctly.
I think you were saying it, you were doing just great.
Okay, so just have a working group to
establish
that information
regulations beyond this next season.
Beyond this next season. Okay, that sounds great. Sorry, I wasn't able to reiterate that.
I was just going to say, Trish, what I wrote down from what he said was to recommend DWR create a committee to create regulations moving forward.
Okay, that sounds great. So we have a motion on the table. Do I have a second on that motion?
I'll second that.
Okay, I have a second by Kent Johnson. So at this point, are there any other questions or comments before we take a vote?
I got one quick comment. I just feel like there is a perception out there that the public's voice has been, that there has been an effort to get the public voice, and we get it, and then we just say, yeah, that's the majority, but we're not going to go with that. I just think there's a great perception out there that the opportunity for your average hunter is going away faster and faster and faster. And there is a lot of people that are not feeling like they're being heard. And I guess I'll just say that. I can see, I think everybody's had some very valid points, but I do feel like there is a lot of people feeling like they're being neglected, public hunters that are feeling like they're being neglected.
Okay, that's a great comment.
And Steve, I guess in part of my motion, I don't want to dismiss that because I think that that's obviously a statistically significant survey that was done. And I just think that this is a move in that direction to see if there's things that we can do to mitigate those concerns before an outright ban. But I'm not saying that a year from now, an outright ban on guiding won't be the resolution.
One quick comment on that too. My hesitation with the working group is of the interested parties is, and this is probably an exaggeration, but it'll look something like 2 division people, 2 public hunters, and 2 guides, and that's not even close to what the actual representation is of who are using that WMA. I mean, it's 98% public hunters, 1% guides. And so I don't know how you could even put a working group together that would actually represent it accurately or even near as accurately as this poll has.
That's a good point.
I'd like to
I wonder
weigh
if
in
we could.
also.
Oh, go ahead.
This is,
Go ahead, Brad.
so I, from what I take from all of this is, it sounds to me like we're just kicking the can down the road a little bit. And I think I agree with Kurt and Dana and Steve that we need to kind of act, and the public is both, and it's obvious where they stand with it. And so I don't necessarily think we need to develop a working group and push this out into the future. I think we should take the RAC board's recommendation and move on at that direction with the public comments weighed in as well. That's my 2 cents.
Great, thanks, Brad. Do we have any more comments before we take a vote on that motion? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and take a vote. So we have a motion on the table by Scoot, seconded by Kent, to create a permitting process and then a working group that will look at regulations for the upcoming year. Kent?
Yes.
Okay. Scoot?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Brad?
No.
Thank you. Steve?
No.
Kirk?
No.
Thank you. Commissioner?
No.
Dana?
No.
Garish, are you there?
I'm here and I vote no.
Okay, great. So that motion failed 6-3. Great discussion and really good motions. So do I have another motion? Steve?
Yeah, I will make a
Oh,
motion.
Dana? Okay, great. Go ahead, Steve, sorry.
That's okay. I make a motion to accept the division's proposal as it's stated.
Okay, so I have a motion on the table by Steve Duke to accept the division's recommendations as presented. Do I have a second on that?
I second.
Okay, I have a second. Was that Brad?
Garish.
No. That was
Oh, Garish, thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Garish. All right, so do I have questions or comments prior to taking a vote on that? All right, I'm going to go ahead.
Just to show where my position needs to be agreeing with Stephen and Garish is I'm elected to represent the majority of the people. And even if I was a guide and hated this, if the majority of the people have asked for it, I need to vote for the majority.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. All right. So at this time, we have a motion and a second on that. Dana, did you have a comment, or Brad?
I'd have just one comment.
Okay, great.
It was stated that the guides would be banned on 100% of hunting units, which is not accurate. The guides will still have the ability to hunt on, but not on WMAs, but they'll be able to hunt.
Right. Yeah, great comment. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead.
Tricia, I'd like to make a comment too. My understanding is that a lot of the guides will they can access the WMA, or they access other areas through the WMA. They use the facilities that the division has provided. And the way that Blair's presentation had it is they can travel through the WMA to get to other areas. They just can't hunt on them. And I think that's they're getting a real benefit from the state, from the division, by not being banned completely, but by being able to utilize the WMA for access.
Yeah, great comment,
Yeah.
Garish. Blair,
Here's just a clarification. They will only be able to use access to other areas through the WMAs if they get a special use permit to do so.
that is correct.
That's correct.
Good. Blair, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention real quick, we also had a couple other things in our RAC packet, and so I think this motion would address all those. And I just wanted to, I guess, remind you guys that it also pertains to Utah Lake Wetland Preserve blinds and a new crane hunt boundary. And so I guess just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that as well.
Right.
Just
Okay.
one other quick comment, Tricia.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I seconded and voted for Scoot's motion because I thought he had some good ideas in there, and I thought it deserved to be heard and have a vote on it.
Yeah, I agree. No, I think there's a lot of validity in stating motions that maybe don't pass, but you want those comments to be floating out there and for the wildlife board to hear it. So I think there's a lot of validity in that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and take a vote on that. Kent.
And that's the reason my comment was made, because I'm going to vote for Stephen's motion as well.
Okay, great. Scoot.
No, even though I know what the results will be.
Okay, great. Eric.
No, as well. And just note, I appreciate Steve's concern about the public, and I have that same concern as well. But I do think that there's news to make it work for everyone.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Brad.
Yes, I'll vote yes.
Thank you. Steve. Duke.
Yes.
Thank you. Kirk.
Yes.
Commissioner.
Yes.
Thank you. Dana.
Yes.
And Garish.
Yes.
Okay, great. So that passes 7-2. Thank you so much. So that concludes agenda item number 5. So we will move on to agenda item number 6, electronic meeting rule amendments. Kyle Maynard, the Assistant Attorney General, is here for our questions and comments. And Chris Wood, are you there?
Yeah, I don't have any comments or any survey results for this action.
Okay, that's what I thought. And Kyle, do you want to say anything before we proceed?
Sure. Yeah, I can just throw out some comments that I've received in previous RACs. But first, just to summarize the presentation, I'm sure you all watched. These rule changes mostly pertain to making sure we comply with the Public Meetings Act as we look at a hybrid option. The hybrid option itself is still being discussed by Director's Office, and that'll be a conversation to come. Some comments I've received were pertaining to the public's ability to participate and whether this could potentially limit public participation. That is not the case. These edits, in theory, could actually allow greater public participation. As far as digital live participation in a RAC meeting, that's kind of up to what our tech department can feasibly handle and what the hybrid plan actually looks like. But as far as the rules themselves go, these edits provide the most flexibility.
Okay, Great, thank you, Kyle. So do I have any questions for Kyle at this time? Okay, I don't think so. Do I have any comments? I guess the one thing I will state is I actually went to a division meeting last week, I believe, in Springville, and I had done that meeting remotely the meeting before, and there is just a huge value in being at a meeting and being able to have those interactions. And so I think it's great to have that hybrid model, but I'll just state that, like, there's a lot to be said for being there and being heard, and especially regarding our public. So do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Okay, I have a motion on the table by Kent Johnson to approve the recommendations made by the division. Do I have a second on that?
Dana can second.
Okay, great. And I have a second by Dana. Are any additional questions or comments before we take a vote? All right, we'll go ahead. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say thank you for looking into the.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a vote. So Kent.
Yes.
Great. Scoot?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Brad?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Kirk?
Yes.
Commissioner?
Lynn, commissioner sounds way too stuffy. Yes.
I like it. I'm just parroting Chris.
I know, but I've been uncomfortable the whole meeting, so.
I like it. Dana?
Yes.
Great. And Garish?
Yes, Commissioner.
Cool thing. So that passed unanimously. We are at the end of our meeting. Chris, do you have anything to add at this time?
I don't. It's been a good meeting. I love the discussion. You guys came prepared, and there was some great points brought up on both sides. And I think if our public, if they're listening, I think they're going to feel like they were heard. It was great.
Yeah, I know. I have felt that way. I just feel like you guys are asking excellent questions, and the division is always really prepared. And I think, yeah, we're accomplishing a lot via these meetings. So I want to thank you guys so much. I have had a great time being involved with the RAC, and I'm really going to miss it. Chris we've already been talking about it. I'm going to miss it. I am in a lot of meetings, and this is one of the few meetings that, I hate to say this, I'm extremely passionate about. And so, not that I'm not passionate about my other obligations, but this is something that I'm really passionate about. And so you guys just keep on keeping on. So at this time, I'm going to make a motion. Will I get a motion to adjourn?
Chris,
Yeah.
before you make that motion, I just want to say thanks for your service.
Yeah, ditto. I agree.
You've done a great job. Good luck to you in your future endeavors.
Thank you.
Thanks, Trish.
Kirk knows I'm going to need it, or Lynn knows I'm going to need it being a commissioner.
And she's still around.
I'd actually like to have a conversation with you when all the rest of them aren't listening. So you need to give me a call.
I will. All right.
Don't wish that upon me.
About a few things that have happened, so you need to call me.
Okay, that sounds good. So can I entertain a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, I've got a motion on the table by Lynn Sitterud and a second by Brad.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so Kent?
Yes.
Scoot?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Brad? Is he gone? There he is. Yes. Steve?
Yes.
Kirk?
Yes.
Lynn?
Yes.
Dana?
Yes.
And Garish?
Yep.
Okay, this meeting of Southeastern RAC is adjourned. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Trish.
Bye.
Thank you, Trish.
Thank you.
Thanks.